All right, so a while back we covered this video about Sue Klebold. I'm gonna go find it because I have it somewhere in here, and it was interesting. It was a little off when I watched it.
When you're wearing,
it's called Sue, My Son Shot Up Columbine, Klebold. That's the name of the original person's video, and I made a response
since
to that.
Columbine.
And as I was watching it, some of the things were a little bizarre. There was a lot of intentionality assigned to Sue, as if making it almost feel like she tried to manufacture this situation. And I'm not going to sit here and say that she didn't have a negative impact, or an impact on making her son the way that he was. That's, of course, always true, right? We know that. You're a product of your environment, and your family is part of that environment, of course. But it felt a little off, but it was still a good video. And this guy decided to respond. It's a smaller creator named Miorby. This YouTuber is lying about Sue Klebold. So I'm interested in seeing the counter perspective. So let's go.
Hi, I want to talk to you about this video. It's by the YouTuber Timmy2Cents, and it's about Sue Klebold, who is the mother of Dylan Klebold, one of the 2 school shooters from the Columbine school shooting. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because I believe Timmy's video is extremely deceptive. It lets the viewers believe things that aren't true, simply because of the way that Timmy presents them. Throughout his video, Timmy will say things that just simply aren't true. He will misattribute quotes to people that didn't say those things, and he will take actual quotes out of context to make them seem worse than they actually are. And now normally I'd be more charitable than to call someone a liar. I'd say that they were wrong or misguided, but in this...
Well, I mean, it's perfectly possible. It's the internet. When sensation... I mean, it's just the world at this point. I mean, it's the media, any type of media. Sensationalization reigns supreme. People want... That's what... It's so sad. It's so sad that, that's how the world is. We just sensationalize everything.
Specific case, I think that you'll agree the only way a video like his could be made would be if someone set out purposely to be deceptive. Now, I don't want my video to be needlessly long, so I'm going to miss some things, unfortunately, but I'll do my best to address the most important things, okay? So with that being said, let's get into the video.
If you didn't know, Sue Klebold is the mother of Dylan, who in 1999 tried to kill everyone at Columbine High School in Colorado. Sue claims that not only could she not have known, but no one could have identified her son as a deranged killer.
I mean, just to be clear, even if that's true, if that's what she said, and even if she is wrong, we're talking about many, many, many years ago when we didn't have as robust mental health to be able to examine these things. And the police dropped the ball, from what I see. The police cleared this guy. I think my understanding was there was a bit of an interaction where the police were like, it's fine. And so, as a parent, you're like, I guess the police know better, right?
Sue doesn't say anywhere in her TED Talk that she couldn't have known that Dylan would turn out to be a school shooter.
Really?
Nor that nobody could have known that Dylan would turn out to be a school shooter.
Really?
But we're going to come back to that claim in a little bit.
Oh, well, damn. Well, she didn't even say that? Well, that's a real big lie.
But first of all, there are 2...
Oh, I guess that's in his interpretation after seeing everything.
2 things that I want to point out. And number 1 is that if Sue had said that she couldn't have known that Dylan would turn out to be a school shooter, she would have been right. There was no way for Sue to know that Dylan would have turned out to be a school shooter.
Yeah, that's like me saying, there's no way that I could ever fix a car. You know what I mean? Because I can't right now. I don't have the training to do it. I suppose if I got trained, I could do it. But just because other people can do a thing doesn't mean everybody can do that thing. Not everybody is that emotionally intelligent or well-trained. And again, this is years and years and years later where mental health is much more prevalent. Back in the day, people did not care about mental health the way that we do now. And even now, we struggle to care about mental health as a society. So the idea of I could have never known. Yeah, probably not. You probably couldn't have. We're not all that capable of knowing. So...
And
hey, what's
Timmy
up?
just brushes over that, as if that suggestion is silly, even though it's the truth. The second thing is that nowhere in Timmy's video does he actually back up the claim that Sue claims that nobody could have known that he would turn out to be a school shooter. He just says it. And I tried my best to find her saying that, and I couldn't, which makes me think that he's just made it up. But anyway, we'll come back to this a bit later.
Yeah, it's probably his interpretation of it, of the situation after he examined himself. So I think it's a claim based on his interpretation of what she said.
So let's carry on watching.
She has reached the highest level of cope, and I find her statements both counterproductive.
And just to be clear, cope isn't necessarily a bad thing all the time. Hitting the highest level of cope isn't necessarily always bad. You know what I mean? There's positive copes. There's positive coping mechanisms, right?
And insulting to rational parents and society at large. Because when you learn all the facts about the case, who Dylan was, the mountain of evidence showing Dylan and Eric's plan, it's hard to imagine why Ted would ever allow her anywhere near a stage and a microphone. Sue is the parent of one of the most deranged...
Let's be clear. It makes sense. That's kind of what TED talks about. Platforming people like that have they're going through something. It's something a little crazy going on there. You know, it's an interesting conversation. And frankly, I think that for a lot of people, especially who are very curious about mental health and stuff like this, I think that it, like for myself, is a morbid curiosity in knowing this kind of stuff. And part of mental health is this concept of humanizing the inhuman. You know, to have a better mental health impact on society, you need to be able to examine somebody who's done something inhuman and humanize it. Why? Because then you can figure out why they did it and you can reduce that happening. And so like that's just something that needs to happen sometimes. It's uncomfortable and not everybody could do it.
Children that has ever walked Earth. And without an admission of error,
I'm watching a work. I hope I don't get caught. Yeah, good luck.
she has nothing to teach us.
So there's two things to address here. Number one, you talk about the mountain of evidence, and presumably you're talking about the notebooks and the recordings that show their plans for Columbine, right? But it's important to point out to the audience that Sue didn't have access to this information. She didn't have access to the tapes and she didn't have access to the notebooks until 6 months after the shooting.
Interesting. The way that he made it seem like is that if she was able to see it the whole time.
She didn't have access to their plans, and so why is it silly for Ted to offer her
That's unfortunate that he was such a liar about it. Damn. I've been misled.
a TED Talk
Damn.
just because they have access to those plans in retrospect? Your argument only makes sense if Sue had access to those things. But she didn't. The second thing is that you say that Sue doesn't have anything useful to provide unless she offers an admission of guilt. And yet 8 seconds later, you cut off the part in her TED Talk where she gives an admission where she says that she failed as a mother. Here's the part that you
Oh, damn.
show in your video.
Before the shootings, I thought of myself as a good mom. Helping my children become caring, healthy, responsible adults was the most important role in my life.
I wanted to first
Damn, I should have watched the thing. That's disappointing. I'm disappointed in myself.
check
And then here's the bit immediately following on from there.
Was the most important role in my life. But the tragedy convinced me that I failed as a parent. And it's partially this sense of failure that brings me here today.
Later on in my video,
Yeah, I feel that. That's unfortunate.
I'm going to show more places where Sue has tried to take responsibility, and they're all from
It's interesting because, you know, she comes off very professional there, which can sometimes, you know, that lack of emotion can come off as disingenuous, but
sources that you've cited in your video, which means that you've seen it, and then you've chosen to not include it in your video because it doesn't feed the narrative that you're trying to weave. A thing throughout Timmy's video is him suggesting that Sue needs to take responsibility for the shootings, but I want you to consider what exactly is it that she needs to take accountability for.
that's fair. That's a great question. I love that question. And I mean, that's one of the best questions. There's a constant narrative online of like, this person needs to take responsibility for this action. And it's like, okay, what does that mean to you? And oftentimes they won't give that. Oftentimes on the internet, people will be told that they need to take accountability, but they won't be told what accountability looks like. Like, this person needs to take accountability for this. What should they do? They don't tell you. And it seems very intentional. And oftentimes I feel like if people did say like, yeah, I think this needs to happen, people would start to realize like, you look silly. Is that a proportionate, response? That's why people keep things so vague on the internet.
That is the case that I would expect Timmy to make in his video, is what exactly is it that she's not taking accountability for? And so I want you to just keep an eye out for that as we carry on watching the video. Now it's going to get very interesting.
Like her accountability looks like you should feel ashamed of yourself because you had a part to play in that your kid being shit and being a murderer. An active role? No. Like I doubt she was like, I want my kid to do. No, of course not. But there was a failure as a parent there. Maybe you didn't pay attention to him enough, or maybe you were abusive and you didn't even realize, but that abuse might have come from your parents being abusive to you, and you're just kind of passing down abusive tendencies without realizing it. But that's the way you are accountable for it, of like feeling that shame in yourself and then going on TED Talk. That could be a way to reverse that or to take accountability, because you could explain to other people like, this is how I failed. Don't be that failure. Be raw and honest and explain to people what you fucked up on, so that people will be like, oh yeah, you know what, like, there you go. Like, maybe there's a warning sign in my kid I have to pay attention to.
Interesting, because this is when the real deception begins.
A New York Times article reviewed Sue's book. The top comment reads, watching her rationalize her son's murderous actions is nauseating. She blames ignorance and Eric Harris, but never herself, a vile person.
Now, this is a very interesting move that Timmy makes, where instead of citing the book or citing the New York Times review of the book, we're citing the comment section on the review of the book. You read out a comment saying that she doesn't take responsibility, and yet if you were to read out the article to your viewers, you would read this. The crime of which Klebold convicts herself is ignorance, and for that she feels bottomless
Thank you so much for the membership. I appreciate that.
guilt. She recalls being dumbfounded when someone asked her if she could ever forgive her son. Forgive Dylan, I said. My work is to forgive myself. I was the one who let him down, not the other way around.
Interesting. Damn. Bro, this guy's only 5 minutes in. This is one of the most impressive videos I've ever seen. That's insane how disingenuous this original video was. This guy's a scumbag. Wow. He really lied to people about
When you're wearing
a lot of these narratives here. This is crazy.
You say she's not taking responsibility, and yet to me, it seems like she's almost taking too much responsibility. Because again, she didn't cause this. One would presume that since you've read the comments on that article, that you've actually read the article, which means that you saw her trying to take responsibility, and then you went on to claim, even though you knew better, that she didn't take any responsibility.
People are able to know so much more about Dylan and Eric because of all the
It's
information.
so interesting too, because the end of that video was a very explicitly read out account of what happened in Columbine. Really horrific. And I think it churned me. It churned my stomach. And I think it would for anybody who listened to that. A very detailed account of how they went into that school and they traumatized and murdered people. And looking back on it, it's like that was a good quarter of the video, I want to say, based on what I remember. And it's this idea that this guy came on, intentionally lied, and then showed us all the horrible things that he did to almost emotionally distract us from the narrative that he was pushing. A dishonest narrative that seemingly, and I'm pretty convinced at this point, was created to virtue signal and virtue bully somebody. Does that make sense? I've been talking about this a lot. You look at somebody who did a bad behavior, and we knew it was bad, and then you just lie about it, and you're like, I care more about this. And then you just start doing it for your own personal gain, trying to platform yourself. It's just weird and disgusting. And meanwhile, you're not changing anybody's mind. Nobody's having a positive impact. Nobody's identifying bad behaviors in their kid and going, oh my God, I need to change this. You're just kind of there to make a career out of lying about a narrative.
Information they left behind. Because Columbine wasn't committed by a lone wolf who kept to himself. And it's worth noting, there hasn't been another school shooting involving multiple people since Columbine.
It's very interesting that you say this, because again, it's not true. In 2019, there was a school shooting at the STEM high school in Colorado, where two students, Devin Michael Erickson and Alex McKinley, went into their high school and shot up the place, killing 1 and injuring 8. Now, I found this information in one Google search. That's all it would have taken for Timmy to find out that he was wrong, was one Google search. And yet he was perfectly content to just sit there and say something that wasn't true, and then include it in the final edit of the video. It just says a lot about his credibility.
In 2004, Sue did an interview where she went into defense mode saying that Dylan did not do this because of the way he was raised. He did it in contradiction to the way he was raised. Shocker. Parents of mass murderer take no responsibility.
Responsibility for what?
Well, I mean, I doubt that she tried to raise him to be a murderer. Like, that's like a weird claim, but okay.
You still haven't made any claim for what it is that Sue is supposed to be taking responsibility for. She didn't keep guns in her for what it is that Sue is supposed to be taking responsibility for. Sue didn't abuse her kids. She didn't keep guns in her house. There were no guns from the Klebold residence that were used in the school shooting. What exactly is it that she should be taking responsibility for? Timmy seems to know something that we don't know. It'd be mighty fine if you'd share it with us.
The worst part of the interview is when Tom Klebold, Dylan's dad, says people need to understand this could have happened to them, which is another way of saying school shooters are completely random.
No, not necessarily. I mean, it could. Here's the thing. If your kid turns out to be a school shooter, you probably had an impact on that in some capacity. And it's a sad, hard reality. You have to absorb that. But at the same time, there are so many different environmental factors and genetic factors and those things mixing that could cause this problem. I often I'll make jokes about how if I didn't go into the current life path that I did now, that I might be a really bad person. And I'm not joking. That's probably true. Given what I know about myself, I have what I would say is probably biological anger problems that I have very well managed, of course. I'm big. I'm aggressive. If I was alive 1,000 years ago during the Viking times, I would be probably a disgusting human being. I'd be a fucking leader of a clan. Okay, I would be a fucking raping and pillaging. I hate to say it, but I had a lot of help. My mother, she did well enough to take me to therapy and different behavioral trainings, and I was in the Boy Scouts. I became an Eagle Scout. I was very lucky to have a scoutmaster who was a Vietnam veteran who was very hard on me in a way that I needed. It was just very good for me. you know, and then I met my wife. Before I met my wife, I was poly, fucking around with a bunch of people. Like, I was just doing whatever I wanted. I had no direction in my life. I was just like I was having sex with girls. I was jacking off a lot. I was wasting my life away, ruining my potential. I was just giving into my like lesser, baser desires. And if I didn't meet my wife, like, then I wouldn't have where I am now, which is I'm much more emotionally regulated. I'm much more sexually regulated. I have an actual direction. You know, my wife and I's relationships was somewhat dramatic when it first started because of where I was in my life. And now we were talking the other day, our relationship's like boring in a good way. Like, our drama is trying to have kids and not be fat. Whereas years ago, it was like, oh, like, we're in a poly relationship and I'm having sex with somebody. And that might be something that upsets, like, you know, somebody else, even though it's part of the relationship, because these things are very complicated. And it's like, we are more the victim of our environment than people really want to think and admit. You know, and that's just life. That's just life, man. And I think it's something to acknowledge. And sometimes, you know, that's what we're talking about here. That's really what we're talking about here. So, you know, yeah, there's a lot going on, man.
It isn't, and this is a perfect example of Timmy taking words out of context to make them seem worse than they actually are. In the interview, Tom and Sue were talking about the fact that they're looking for answers of what it was that turned their son into a killer. Let's read it in context. When they talk about the event, they discuss it as a suicide. They acknowledge but do not emphasize the murders their son committed. They also think about the signs that they missed. He was hopeless. We didn't realize it until after the end, Tom said. Susan added, I think he suffered horribly before he died, and for not seeing that, I will never forgive myself. They believe that what they call the toxic culture of the school, the worship of jocks and the tolerance of bullying, is the primary force that set Dylan off, but they confess that in the main, they have no explanation.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a level of truth to that. I mean, schools are chaotic. I remember being in school. It was terrible. I think school is the worst time for a lot of people. It's just so weird and toxic, and it can be very confusing and frustrating. For a lot of people, that doesn't make it mean that people deserve to get shot. But I remember thinking that the world was over if anything bad happened in school. Like, I remember like, oh, they're going to think about this. This is who you are for the rest of your life. School feels like the end of the world. And then you get out of it, and all of a sudden you're like, holy fuck, the world's so different.
I'm a quantitative person, said Tom, a former geophysicist. We're not qualified to sort this out. They long for some authoritative study that will provide an answer. People need to understand, Tom said, this could have happened to them. In that quote, they're talking about the fact that they're looking for the things that radicalize their son. They're not saying it's random. If they were saying it's random, they would say that there was no cause of what turned their son into a killer. But they're not saying that, and Timmy suggesting it is a lie. I would have also have loved for Timmy to have read out the next paragraph after the one that he cited, where the author of the interview gives his views on the situation. My instinct is that Dylan Klebold was a self-initializing moral agent who made his choices and should be condemned for them. Neither his school nor his parents determined his behavior. Now his parents have been left with the terrible consequences. I'd say that they're facing them bravely and honorably.
I somewhat disagree. I think the school and the parents probably had a pretty considerable factor, but I understand where this person's coming from.
Could we just take a moment to acknowledge the fact that Timmy is taking the words of victims out of context here to make them seem bad? Now, you can argue to what degree people are victims. Obviously, they're not as much victims as the victims of the families, but they're definitely victims because, again, they didn't cause this.
In 2009, Sue wrote an essay, I Will Never Know Why, for Oprah magazine. Mike Litwin of the Denver Post wrote an article criticizing the essay. He said, Klebold wrote too much and at the same time revealed so little. It's not just that she tells only her side of the story, it's that while reading it, there's so much she either doesn't see or doesn't want us to see.
Why are we doing this again?
Okay, I mean, maybe she just doesn't see it, I don't know.
Why is it that instead of citing an article that you mentioned briefly, we're citing somebody else's negative review of the article? Is the reason that you don't want to read out the article because if you do, you're going to have to read out this? Those of us who cared for Dylan felt responsible for his death. We thought if I had been a better mother, father, brother, friend, aunt, uncle, cousin, I would have known that this was coming.
Damn.
We perceived his actions to be our failure. I tried to identify a pivotal event in his upbringing that could account for his anger. Had I been too strict, not strict enough? Had I pushed too hard or not hard enough? In the days before he died, I had hugged him and told him how much I loved him. I had held his scratchy face between my palms and told him that he was a wonderful person and that I was proud of him. Had he felt pressured by this? Did he feel like he couldn't live up to my expectations? I longed to talk to Dylan one last time to ask him what he'd been thinking. I spoke to him in my thoughts and prayed for understanding. I concluded that he must not have loved me because love would have prevented him from doing what he did. And though at moments I was angry with him, mostly I thought that I was the one who needed his forgiveness because I'd failed to see that he needed help. Again, this is a mother trying to find a way to put the blame on herself for what happened, when ultimately, she didn't cause this. Given that this is an article that you've mentioned, presumably you've read it. You've read her trying to take the blame, and then you've made a whole video about the fact that she's not willing to take the blame.
Yeah.
It's so disingenuous. And yet you've still failed to make the case for what it is that Sue's supposed to be taking responsibility for.
In 2016, Sue released her book and did her first TV interview. We'll talk more about the book later in the video, but she says things like this in her book. The ultimate message of this book is terrifying. You may not know your own children, and worse yet, your children may be unknowable to you. The stranger you fear may be your own son or daughter. At least she's consistent with her messaging.
Now, this is a perfect example of Timmy just blatantly lying to you. He presents a quote as if it's Sue saying these words. He even says, well, at least Sue is consistent with her messaging. But that quote isn't from Sue. Those are the words of the author Andrew Solomon, who wrote the foreword to Sue's book, giving his views and his opinions on the situation. Everyone
Jesus Christ, dude. This guy's such a scumbag. What the fuck?
hearing that quote, myself included, would have assumed that those were Sue's words when they simply weren't. And this happens more than once in Timmy's video, where he misquotes someone claiming that these are Sue's words. It happens again later on.
In 2017, we have the TED Talk, and she ends the talk with this statement.
In the end, what I know comes down to this. The tragic
I really wish I just watched the goddamn TED Talk. I feel so stupid.
fact is that even the most vigilant and responsible of us may not be able to help. But for love's sake, we must never stop trying to know the unknowable. Thank you.
She insinuates that any child could be secretly plotting a massacre, and the parents can't know. However, we should keep trying anyway?
When Sue
That is an interesting perspective on that. What did I originally say? Because that's psychotic. It sounds like what she's saying is that you're not always going to be able to stop people, but you need to try, right? Like not everything that you I think it's just very normal. I think that we all understand what that means. You know, you need to try your best to stop some kind of, or to just be more attentive to your kids so that something horrific doesn't happen. I think it's really not that deep, right? I think that's pretty, we all understand that, but okay.
Sue talks about the unknowable in her TED Talk. She's wrapping up a talk on depression. She's saying that you don't always know how someone is feeling and how they're thinking. And that's a fact.
And suicide is prevalent. It's the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34.
Interesting.
And 15% of American youth report having made a suicide plan in the last year. I've learned that no matter how much we want to believe we cannot know or control everything our loved ones think and feel.
In the description, I'm going to leave citations for everything I reference, every article and every video, so that you know that I'm not pulling a Timmy on you. But I implore you to go watch the TED Talk in full. I promise you that there is no rational way for you to watch the TED Talk and assume that she's saying that anyone's kid could become a school shooter. It's not what she's talking about. She's talking about depression. And yet again, I'd like to re-emphasize the fact that you can't always know when someone is going to become a school shooter. If she was saying that, it would be true. I mean, is Timmy suggesting that he has a way to spot a school shooter early? Share it with us. We'd love to know. Now, the next part of the video is my favorite misrepresentation, where Timmy introduces
White? I don't know.
Randy and Judy Brown.
And in 2020, Randy Brown released a book titled The Inside Story of...
It is interesting that we talk so much about white school shooters when like other types of school shooters do exist. And we're like, no, that's not true. It is. It is. It's just that we don't talk about them unless they're white. Usually because the media can spin a narrative on it and make it seem like there's, you know, that it is mostly white people. But if you look at especially a lot of disaffected areas, like there's a lot of school shootings going on, a lot of gang violence school shootings, and we just don't talk about them because that's not sexy. To the media, you can't make a sexy narrative about that. That's it. Fuck, I forgot to get the flight path. God damn it. It's fucked up. Oh, wait, I should actually have it already, right? Because I'm part of this town? I think I do.
Columbine. Lies, cover-ups, ballistics. Randy had a son who was friends with Dylan at one point, and he knew the Klebold family personally. This is a home videotape of Dylan in Randy's home, and this is a picture of Randy's son, Brooks, with Dylan. For clarity, Randy's wife is Judy, and Randy specifically references Sue Klebold's book in this passage. I read it, and I was really upset. It was not the truth. There, plain and simple, it was not the truth. She makes light of the warnings that Judy gave her about Eric Harris. Judy told her that he was dangerous and to keep him away from Dylan. Judy warned her very clearly as a friend. Sue ignored her. Sue was warned and chose to ignore it.
That's pretty damning, right? I mean, Judy had warned Sue about Eric and how dangerous Eric was. Now, we're going to come back on this in a minute, and I'm going to provide you some context that's going to turn that narrative right on its head. But first, I just want to mention the fact that Judy Brown was actually friends with Sue Klebold, and on the morning of the Columbine school shooting, they were actually together. And do you know who doesn't blame Sue Klebold for the school shooting? Judy Brown.
Judy, let me ask you about Sue Klebold, the mother
Did she change her mind?
of Dylan Klebold. She must be looking back on this every day, thinking to herself,
You might have to update your previous video, a link to this. Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah.
what could I have done I think, again, as we look back on this crime at the end of the year now, some people are still looking at the parents, still saying the parents should have done more. How could these kids have obtained these weapons, made these videos? The parents never would have found out. You still talk to Sue Klebold on a regular basis. What is she thinking about that?
We talk quite openly about it. She has nothing to hide. In the first place, a lot of those things didn't take place in the Klebold house that I am aware of and that she is aware of. Sue wants the answers too. I'm asking kids. I'm trying to find out any clue we can get. This part of Dylan's personality, I'm not getting anything, and we want the answers. Sue was not aware of this behavior in her child. I wouldn't be defending Sue, believe me. You have to remember that Dylan that day meant to kill both my children. I had a child in the cafeteria and Dylan knew he was in the cafeteria. I would not be defending this mom if I thought that she knew, even though she was a good friend. This mom did not know, and this was a good, nurturing mom.
And that was Judy Brown on CNBC shortly after.
And it might not be true that she was a good, nurturing mom. I mean, she probably did her best, but it's quite possible that she was kind of a bitch. We don't really know. But still, I mean, this woman seems to be in support. So though it's weird to show us whatever it was before, that makes it seem like she was actively condemning her
after the shooting. And Timmy in his video suggests that Judy Brown knew how evil Eric was and that she'd warned Sue. And then Timmy goes on to say this.
As we'll talk later, Randy reported Eric Harris to the police more than a year before Columbine, and he was the only one who publicly addressed the issue in advance.
You went to them and said, here's a red flag.
More than a red flag, here were 3 felonies that we had turned into them, making and detonating pipe bombs and threatening my son's life, and they didn't pursue it. They didn't do their job.
I was utterly dumbfounded.
Oh, wasn't that talk about the police? The police didn't do their job, right? Isn't that what that's referring to?
They did nothing with the web pages. Eric was saying how he was going to blow people up. Hey, I'm making pipe bombs. I got the designs for them on my website. I'm going to kill these people. Here's why. That's a level beyond making a joke.
That's even more damning, right? Eric had this website where he wrote about how to make bombs, and he'd made a hit list and spoken about how he was going to shoot up the school. That's truly evil. How could Sue have not known what was going to happen?
This mom did not know, and this was a good, nurturing mom.
And could not have known? I mean, let's accept the fact that she didn't know, but I think still a lot of people are saying, but she should have known, even if she didn't.
You know, that is hard to believe.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a cope. I think that other people would be like, I'd be able to identify it and not my kid. It's like, you may not have be able to. Hey, what's up, Kat?
But I know what she knows, and I will tell you, I did not share the web pages with her in the beginning, and I've explained that that's quite complicated. Until after the tragedy did I share the web pages with her.
Why? Why didn't you share the web pages with her?
When I shared the web pages with her, she said, oh my, Eric is such an angry child. She had never known that.
That's right.
Why the fuck didn't she share it with what the fuck's wrong with her? This is her fault. All right? The whole thing's her fault. She's bad. I'm just kidding. But why the fuck wouldn't you share those web pages? That's fucking weird.
Judy hadn't warned Sue about the website. Sue didn't know about the pipe bomb recipe, about the hit list, about the plans to go blow up the school. She didn't know. But now Timmy has built a narrative where you think, well, Judy had warned Sue about Eric, and Judy knew how evil Eric was, therefore Judy must have warned Sue about all of the evil things that Eric was getting up to. But that's just not the case. Judy had told Sue that Eric was dangerous. That was it. No specifics, not that he was evil, not that he was going to blow up a school and he had this website, just that he was dangerous. And it would have been very difficult for Sue to know how evil Eric was when the Browns didn't even tell Eric's parents how evil Eric was.
We knew Eric was dangerous. We didn't know what he was going to do, and we were cautious.
Right.
He had set off fireworks on our front, right on that front sidewalk there, right by the door. He shot a window out in the house. They had burned bushes at a friend's house.
Right.
But
like
so
marijuana?
we went to the police. We didn't go to the parents. You go to the parents and they're going to go, oh, we can work this out. He's a good kid. Okay, let's do that. We went to the police.
Right.
We went to the police a lot.
Timmy then goes on to say that Randy Brown should be offered a TED Talk.
Why wouldn't you go to the police? Why wouldn't you go to the parents, though? Like, I'm not saying don't go to the police as well, but why not go to the parents and the police? Because that's the problem, is that, you know, the problem, listen, parents love their kids usually, and so they'll probably advocate for their kids more. And so if you go to the police, they'll be like, oh, my kid's a good kid, blah, blah, blah. You go into defense mode because you don't want your kid getting arrested. I'm not saying that you have to. I'm just saying, like, maybe it would have been better for you if you did go to the parents.
Because Randy was, quote, the first person to correctly assess a modern shooter in history. Now, even this isn't true. Randy will openly admit that he didn't know how evil Eric was. Judy thought that Eric was going to attack their son. She didn't think that he was going to shoot up the school or blow up the school.
Did you think Eric could commit mass murder?
Actually, we thought Eric would kill Brooks is what we thought would happen.
Right.
Judy had, Gavin DeBecker talks about it in his book, The Gift of Fear, and that women, and it's odd, have a sense of danger that they listened to that men tend to ignore.
Right. Yeah.
Judy knew that from the beginning. I didn't believe it as much. I thought it was more harassment and problems, and this kid's a jerk, and
Right.
And Brooke seemed to be handling it okay. But
Right.
Judy had that with these kids. She knew Eric was dangerous.
Right.
I didn't know that Eric was as dangerous as he turned out to be. Oh my gosh.
So they were the
Kind of makes sense that a guy wouldn't have that interpretation. Not really even just from like an emotionally intelligent perspective, but I used to light shit on fire and get into fights. So, you know, I would look at somebody doing those same behaviors and go, yeah, that kid's a little lost. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that kid's a little lost. He needs a little bit of help, you know?
first ones to assess a modern shooter in history is a broad statement that isn't even backed up by any facts. But let's just take a moment to consider, what would a TED Talk from Randy Brown look like? What does Randy believe caused the school shooting? Well, the answer, you'll be surprised to know, isn't bad parenting. It's not Sue Klebold, and it's not video games, and it's not gun control. He blames it on the culture of bullying within the school. This is backed up by the journals. Both Eric and Dylan write about being bullied. Dylan especially writes about being bullied. And so now, knowing Randy's position, let's look back on that quote about why Sue's book is a lie. Randy says that the reason Sue's book is a lie is because...
Jesus, how bad was the bullying problem at this school? If this was like... I mean, I don't doubt it, man. It's the fucked up thing about bullying, you know? But some people, I mean, there's bullying culture as a problem in school, and teachers just don't do enough about it.
She doesn't talk about the radicalization from bullying in her book. He actually speaks about it in an interview.
There's so many things that she just didn't tell about that are very important. And they're very important, forgetting about Sue, but to understanding Columbine, the process of violentization. They're very important, showing Dylan's process through the violentization stages, where he's bullied, so then he starts to fight back in small ways, and then he starts to develop this persona of someone who can fight back with the black coat and the sunglasses. And that's that, and see, all the other hundreds of things that we know fit this concept that, and it's more than one concept. It's humiliation, vigilance, and violentization, and the way that those three react, and the process of going through those that develops school shooters. But if she had written about those things, then people reading this could go, and then when they read other things, they go, wait, that fits exactly what Sue said. I just learned something about why this kid did this, and the process of why he became so angry. It wasn't that he was crazy. He was reacting to the bullying that he was experiencing. He was fighting back. And it's part of the violentization process. And so if she had just told the truth in the book, it would have helped. And that's why I know it's awful to say that the book is a lie. Most of the book is a lie. And it matters because people read it and they go, oh, there's no reason why Dylan did this. You've got to be kidding me. Of course there's a reason Dylan did this.
Right.
And she just didn't say it because she doesn't know what it is.
What's interesting is that he says that she doesn't talk about it because she doesn't know what it is. And so it's not an accusation of being deceptive. Now, I'm going to leave that interview in the description as well, and I implore you to go watch the full interview. And so if Randy did a TED Talk, it would be about bullying and bullying causing school shootings. But what's funny about that is if Sue had done that in her TED Talk, you would have accused her of shirking responsibility and that she's being dishonest. I think that just shows how fundamentally dishonest...
Well, it sounds like she might have left some of that context out just because she wouldn't want people to get that idea that she was trying to push criticism off. And it's like, well, it's not really my son's fault. It sounds like that might have been... It sounds like that might have been what it is. Honestly, I wouldn't doubt that.
Honest you're being.
She could have and should have prevented Dylan from hanging out with Eric, which would be standard good parenting, both today and in the 90s. And before people make excuses for Sue, she did the best she could, Dylan's mother worked at a psychiatric hospital in the past and even had a master's degree in educational sciences.
Yeah, I mean, educational sciences isn't the same as like some kind of like social work understanding. But like I said, back in the day, that didn't really mean as much. I mean, back in the day, they used to cut organs out of people to be like, and thinking that might make them less problematic. You know, the lobotomy was the standard of care back then to get people to stop engaging with behaviors, which honestly, in some cases, probably should be used today. I'm not trying to be an asshole, but you know, there are some really fucked up cases. Point I'm making is that like it wasn't like, you know, mental health was so fucking crazy and robust.
Don't think I'm holding her to this unrealistic high standard here.
Sue worked as a therapeutic art teacher in a psychiatric hospital. I think saying that she worked in a psychiatric hospital is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, because I don't think that any of us would expect an art teacher to be able to assess a school shooter. I think it's super interesting that Timmy just says that Sue worked...
Yeah, it's just like an outlet, and like it really just kind of sounds like a class. there's, I forget exactly what it's called, but there are people who go to a day program. That's what it's called. The people with, like, in the IDD community. It's basically like a job, but if your job was to go to school, it's kind of a place for people to go, to be a little constructive, for them to do projects, to keep busy, to find some value in their life. It sounds like Sue was offering that in a psychiatric hospital. Like, hey, here's some art. Let's have fun. Okay.
In a psychiatric hospital to make us all think that she had some psychiatric insight. When she didn't, she was an art teacher, and he purposely presented it in a way.
She might have been more than an art teacher. She might have had a little bit more qualifications in art, but she also might not have. I mean, I really don't know. It's like, I just don't know what the qualifications would be to be able to do that.
To be dishonest. And what does having a master's degree in educational sciences have to do with assessing a school shooter?
No,
she's not a psychiatrist. So now we move on to Dylan's brother, Byron, where Timmy presents Sue as a terrible mother who has raised 2 bad kids. He says this.
Byron also got caught breaking into a Denny's, a American diner, and got a DUI driving drunk. Things were so bad that in Sue's own words, they kicked Byron out of the house by age 19.
Once again, Timmy says that these are Sue's words when they're not. These are the words of the counselor, Andrea Sanchez, from the Juvenile Diversion Program, giving her views after she interviewed Dylan. Sue didn't even get to read this report until 6 months later, and she actually writes about it in her book. She says this. Juvenile records are usually sealed, but after the tragedy, Dylan's diversion reports were released. They stated that Tom and I had kicked our older son out of the house for using drugs. That brought me up short. The decision...
I mean, if that was true, though, I mean, maybe that's not necessarily a bad idea.
...for him to leave the home had been Byron's, made in consultation with a family counsellor, and the move itself had been completely amicable. Plus, Byron was still very much in our lives after he moved out. We saw him for dinner at least once or twice a week. So when you suggest that Sue openly...
I'm going to see my mommy for lunch today. Listen, guys, everything aside, this is a real thing to people. I want people to understand. Make sure you still see your mom and your dad after you move out. Like, especially if you're on good terms already. You know, you might end up moving out on a little bit of bad terms, but sometimes when you're close to people for too long, that separation can bring you back. But make sure you see your parents. Make sure you try to see them once a week, because the other day, I feel horrible for this, but I had planned to see my mother, and I had taken some NyQuil the day before because I had trouble sleeping, so I slept in a little too much. You know how it is. And my mom was calling me and this, that, and the other thing, and I woke up and I missed our date. You know, and I text my mom, like, oh, sorry, Mom, like, I slept, I took some NyQuil, blah, 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 and sorry about that. And she's like, oh, yeah, no problem, that's happened to me too. You know, if you don't want to see me till after the holidays, just let me know, but maybe you could just call me so I could hear your voice. And I was like, damn, that hit me. That fucked me up. I was like, damn, I'm a bad son. That's fucking tragedy, dude. That's tragic. I'm so sorry. So make time for your mom, man. Make time for your fucking mom. All right, be a good guy.
Admits to kicking Byron out of the house, you're just lying. And now, again, I don't like calling people liars. I'd prefer to say, oh, he's wrong here. But when it's lie after lie after lie, the only thing I can do is call you out for lying. There's another interesting detail, though, in the diversion program where they say this. His punishments usually consist of being grounded and not being able to use the computer. Mr. and Mrs. Klebold feel involved in Dylan's life and said that they know where he is and who he's with most of the time. After this incident occurred, he was grounded for a month and was not allowed to spend time with Eric. Timmy wants you to believe that Sue didn't tell Dylan to not hang out with Eric, that she knew how bad Eric was, and that she never did anything to get between them, and yet again, it's not true. Timmy has spent the last 5 minutes of his video talking about how bad Eric was, and that if Sue was a good mother, she would have done anything she could to keep Dylan away from Eric, and yet what we learn in the diversion notes is that that's exactly what they were trying to do. Now, if you've ever been a child, which I assume you have, you'll know how difficult it is for your parents to get you to stop hanging out with someone, especially when you go to the same school. It's almost impossible. But for Timmy to suggest that she didn't even try is just dishonest, especially when Timmy is quoting from the exact same page as that sentence.
But the problem is, nobody is claiming that Sue beat Dylan in a basement dungeon. It's just that she was a bad mom.
Okay, so here we go. Now Sue is a bad mom. Is he going to give justification for it? Well, we'll see. But here's what
I imagine his justification is that he became a school shooter, which could be possible, you know, but then that gets into a conversation about what it means to be a bad mom, you know.
Now, so far. Before the school shooting, Sue didn't know about the plan. She didn't have access to the notebooks, she didn't have access to the tapes, and so she can't rationally be blamed for the shooting. Also, she didn't keep guns in her home. None of Sue's guns were used in the school shooting, so she can't be blamed for that.
Oh, she used guns? She had guns? Based.
She didn't abuse her kids, and in the diversion notes, which you referenced, they say this. Dylan describes his relationship with his parents as better than most kids, and says that they are supportive, loving, dependable, and trustworthy.
Oh, okay. I mean, he could be lying, but, you know, we're making a lot of concessions now.
His parents said that Dylan has a difficult time communicating with them, but he is getting better. And then Sue wasn't told about the website. The police were, and the school were. They were the ones that failed, not Sue. And then after
Wait, what the fuck? The police and the school knew, and they didn't tell the parent? That's like a huge problem. What the fuck? You think that they would have said something? That's like a problem. You should be informing the parents on stuff like that when your kids do. Like, what the fuck is that? That's crazy to me. What?
Van break-in, Sue tried to get Dylan away from Eric. And so what more could Sue have done based on the information she had access to? You're calling her a bad mother, but based on what? What argument are you presenting? And again, everything that I've presented has been stuff that you've spoken about. So you've seen the same information and you've chosen to hide it. And frankly, we're all still waiting to find out what it is that Sue should be taking responsibility for, because he still hasn't said.
And finally, Sue consistently gaslights the audience and cherry picks what she wants the audience to think about her.
My mom just got out of surgery and I live with her. She got a blood clot right now. I've been helping out. That's good. That's a good thing.
To shape a narrative.
What up? You just watched my Noah Sansa video? Very cool. Very pucker. Here you go. Wow.
Numerous examples. One that sticks out in my mind is when she tells a story about how Dylan forgot Mother's Day one year. That spring, we had the worst argument we ever had during his lifetime. It happened on Mother's Day, the last Mother's Day we had together, and it still hurts me to remember it. I can't remember exactly what set me off. I was heartstruck about a disastrous year I'd had with both my kids, angry about Dylan's continuing negativity and bad attitude, and quietly hurt he had forgotten Mother's Day. When I confronted him about his attitude, I had this feeling he was responding not to me, but to some inner joke. It seemed disrespectful. Fed up, I got in his face, I shoved him against the fridge, pinning him there with my hand. Then I waved my finger and gave him a real mom lecture.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little abusive, shoving your kid against a thing. So, sure.
Yell, but there was authority in my voice as I told him he had to stop being so crabby and selfish. The world doesn't revolve around you, Dylan. It's time for you to think about other people in this family. You need to start carrying your weight. Then I reminded him he had forgotten Mother's Day. Finally, in a soft voice that carried warning and power, he said, "Stop pushing me, Mom. I'm getting angry, and I don't know how well I can control it." Even though she's trying to spin a narrative, she can't help but reveal who she is in these stories. It's very strange she doesn't pick.
I mean, that's like, pushing your kid is not good. I mean, I would consider it abusive, but, you know, I don't know if if the kid has got all these anger problems from being like almost abused at school, and then, you know, it might manifest like this, I suppose. You know, maybe he's being angry and maybe life is very unideal. You know, it's easy to expect everybody to act perfectly, so it doesn't speak well to her. But there's a lot going on in life, you know.
Up on the violence in the situation,
because I'm also like a big kid, you know. Too, I was an intimidating kid. So I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe there is something. I don't know. I don't know the specifics.
Almost miss it if you don't pay attention carefully. Sue is seemingly unaware of how violent Dylan was. He threatened that he might not be able to control himself if she doesn't back off. And she admits to pushing him up against the fridge in the beginning of the confrontation. I have a hard time believing that this is how the dispute went down or that this was the worst fight they ever had. But it's interesting that she chose this as the worst example, because to a narcissist, forgetting birthdays or Mother's Day is a big deal.
One of the things that Timmy does in his video...
Maybe. You know, if that was the only line that he threw out there that was like, you know, negative to her, I think it would have been fine. But with everything else, it's clear that he's painting a narrative, and maybe he's basing that narrative off of this one interaction, you know, this one imperfect interaction. I don't really know. Yeah, maybe to a narcissist, forgetting something small could be a big deal, but also to most people, it's a big deal, right? No, I didn't watch this video. I watched the other video before it, right? Like, I feel like I would be upset if like my wife forgot my birthday. Is that a hot take? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, don't forget that, Mom, or my wife, or Mom. I'd be upset if my mom forgot to. That'd be real.
Video that really bothers me is when he goes, "I have a hard time believing X, Y, and Z," as if that's a valid point, but it means nothing. It just means that he doesn't believe something based on nothing. Because if Timmy had evidence of a larger fight between Sue and Dylan, he would have provided it in the video. He doesn't have a good reason to not believe it. He's just telling us that he doesn't believe it. But regardless of that, if we keep reading the quote that you read out, and we keep reading beyond where you read, it builds a bigger picture than the one that you're trying to portray. Later, we sat together at the kitchen table. We both felt awful. I apologized for losing my temper. Dylan apologized for forgetting Mother's Day and volunteered to help me prepare dinner. That afternoon, he went to buy me a card and an African violet planted in a tiny watering can. It was a perfect gift. I love miniatures, and we'd collected some together when he was little. We hugged. I thought it was okay, although I noted he'd only signed his name to the card instead of saying, "Love, Dylan." Of course, I wish we hadn't fought, particularly on Mother's Day, but I felt justified. Aren't you supposed to confront your kids when you feel like they're straying off the straight and narrow? I feel differently about that fight now. I know that hugging my son and telling him that I loved him wouldn't have stopped him from hurting himself and others. Still, I wish I'd taken his hand. Sit down with me. Talk to me. Tell me what's going on. Instead of telling him everything he was doing wrong or what he had to be grateful for, I wish I'd listened and validated his pain. If I had to do it all over again, I'd tell him, "You've changed and it's scaring me." But I wasn't scared. I should have been, but I was not. Now you'll notice that the argument isn't about Dylan forgetting Mother's Day. The argument is about Dylan's attitude getting worse, and he's now gone so far off the rails.
Yeah, and then the forgetting of the Mother's Day was like the straw that broke the camel's back type of thing.
That Sue's trying to get him back on track. And so to illustrate this to Dylan, she points out the fact that he's forgotten Mother's Day. The argument isn't about Mother's Day. And yet in Timmy's video, he makes it out that the argument is about Mother's Day and that Sue is a narcissist because she makes such a big deal out of Dylan forgetting Mother's Day. It is just another example of Timmy taking words out of context to make them seem worse than they actually are.
And Sue had a history of downplaying her son's problems even before the shooting. Just look at this diversion paperwork. Look at how much Sue writes in relation to Dylan's criminal history. Dylan is blunt about his crime. Sue writes a book about the event and insinuates that the crime wasn't that bad.
She uses a bunch of wobbly language. The boys found a van. The van had a ticket on it, so the boys thought it was abandoned. And then they saw if they could get some electronic equipment by helping themselves to some of the contents.
And now Timmy's just clutching at straws.
I mean, maybe. I mean, it's also like a professional document. I don't know. Whatever. I feel
At the diversion hearing, Sue was asked to write in her own words the offense that was committed by Dylan, and she does exactly that. Does she lie? No. She writes about it in her own words, and if you've read her book, which I'm starting to doubt that Timmy has, if you've read her book, you'll know that that is the way that Sue just writes anyway. But you know what, Timmy? You're right. What a terrible mother Sue is for trying to avoid jail time for her son. Her son who, up to this point, only has 2 things on his criminal record, and they're both traffic violations. Terrible mother.
And this sort of...
Well, I mean, like, just to be clear, this was that about the school shooting, or was that about a separate incident? This didn't seem to be about the shooting up of the school. This just seemed to be about a separate incident. So, like, yeah, why would the mother ham it up as much as possible? It's kind of what you're supposed to do. This isn't about the... I mean, they died in the shooting, so it wouldn't be about that, right? I'm pretty sure that's true. Correct me if I'm wrong, I suppose. But why would the mother... Like, yeah, usually that's how it works. I mean, that's how lawyer shit works in general. You basically, you have a situation, and then each side is going to portray that situation as good faith to their argument as possible, even if it's not what actually happened. And then the lawyers and the judge come to the conclusion in the middle. So
he has. If you've read her book, you'll know that that is the way that Sue just writes anyway. But you know what, Timmy? You're right. Only has 2 things on his criminal record, and they're both traffic violations. Terrible mother.
And this sort of wishy-washy language is all over the place. She writes, in fall of '98, Dylan and friends who had access to the school's computer figured out how to find old locker combinations. Look at how she crosses out gained access to who had access. It shifts the blame over to the friends, mainly Eric.
Whatever.
This is a terrible example from Timmy, because this is a valid edit. The words gained access imply something illicit, and who had access would be correct, because she's talking about Eric here. Eric was a student assistant in the tech lab. Eric already had access to the computers, and if Sue had claimed that he gained access to the computers, she would have been implicating Eric, not Dylan.
Why would Sue go through this media campaign? Why not slip into obscurity and move on with life? I believe that Sue is a narcissist on steroids. She finds it unpleasant that she had this role of a...
What's your qualification? That's pretty crazy, man.
Parent to one of the most mentally destructive children in the history of humanity, and in light of what her son did, she found a way to get attention and admiration when most would never dare. Sue's hairdresser was...
I mean, is that her goal, is to get attention and admiration? I don't know if I agree with that.
Was interviewed shortly after the shooting.
But Dee Grant, Susan Klebold's hairdresser, saw her just days after the shooting.
I think I made a joke about how, like, your hairdresser knows everything about you, because that's what you're usually fucking gossiping with. It might be, yeah.
She had no idea her son
She had no idea. I asked her if she had any idea. And she did say, no, I did not want to pry.
I just find this odd. Even if Dylan had just committed suicide, harming no one but himself, I can't imagine getting my hair done in such a short proximity to the tragedy.
Now, towards the conclusion of his video...
What do you mean, like afterwards? Why? I mean, I disagree. My mother got her hair done yesterday. Guess what else happened yesterday? My mother's hairdresser's mother died yesterday. And my mother's hairdresser still did hair. Why? Because when things happen, the world doesn't end. And oftentimes, not doing anything after something happens can be bad for you. Like, there are times where, like, if somebody passes away, let's say your mother or father passed away, you might want to work the next day. You might want to just get to work. You might want to go about business as usual and just kind of get back into a rhythm, because it might fuck you up too much to be too alone with your thoughts, or to distract, or to just do nothing for too long and be unproductive. You know, it's different people process differently. If the insinuation is that she got her hair done the next day, which she might have, I don't even think it's bad if that's true. Well, and when he said close proximity of, maybe he'd happened the day before. I don't really know. That guy's very dishonest in the way that he portrays stuff. But like, who cares? Like, It's the normal human being thing to do.
Timmy says that Sue must be a narcissist because days after the shooting, she went to go get a haircut from her hairdresser. And now people deal with grief in many different ways. Some people lock themselves inside of their house, and some people can't bear to be inside of their house because imagine being Sue the next morning, walking down the stairs, going into the kitchen where your son used to stand at the kitchen counter, and he's not there, and you're immediately reminded not only that your son is now dead, but that he's just killed so many people. Walking down those long echoing hallways and past the empty bedroom. Can you imagine what that's like? And so wanting to get out of the house doesn't seem crazy to me. And for you to say that that's narcissistic is disgusting. But while we're talking about the hairdresser, let's keep running that clip and see what the hairdresser has to say.
She was upset that they were talking about all this prejudice. She says, Dee, we never teach prejudice in our home. She says, Dee, I'm Jewish. This is just as much a tragedy for them as the victims. I mean, all these good people have been victimized by this act.
Here's another account of Sue trying to come to terms with what's happened. She doesn't understand, and at this point, no one has seen what's in the tapes, and no one has seen what's written in the notebooks. So she is genuinely, in real time, grieving and trying to come to terms with what has happened. And you saw this footage in the same video you took it from, and decided to not include it. Now, I found the conclusion to this video to be most enlightening, because right at the end, Timmy suggests this.
Columbine happened for many reasons. Poor mental health, the toxic school environment, easy access to weapons, a lack...
I don't remember him talking about a toxic school environment the entire time. That seemed to be like one of the first references that he ever made. From what I remember, there was nothing about that video that this guy made that had anything to do with the toxic school environment. Am I like misremembering? But it just felt like he kind of like... He just didn't talk about that. Wouldn't that be very important?
Lack of police and school response, and most importantly, terrible parenting. There, I said it.
Now, what's interesting about this is that first, Timmy mentions a number of things that are to blame for Columbine. And yet, earlier in the video, when Sue blamed those things, he accused her of shirking responsibility and that she was trying to blame everyone else other than herself. But that's by the by, because he says that the most important cause of Columbine was bad parenting. Now I ask you, has he made this case? Has he laid out the case of her being a bad mum? Because I certainly didn't see it. So in summary, let's just talk about the things that you've done in your video, just the things I chose to speak about. You have lied about Sue saying that she couldn't have known and that nobody could have known that Dylan would turn out to be a school shooter. And then you went out of your way to quote the author Andrew Solomon and claim that it was Sue saying those words, and then later in the diversion notes he did the same thing about the counselor Andrea Sanchez and said those were Sue's words. You've lied about Sue not taking responsibility and saying that she doesn't provide an admission of error, and yet you've edited out the parts where she does and not cited the parts in the articles that you've mentioned where she does. You cited comment on articles instead of reading the article, and negative reviews of Sue's articles rather than telling us what's actually in the article. You've taken Sue and Tom's words out of context to try and make them look worse than they actually are, and you've completely misrepresented the views of Judy and Randy Brown. You claim that Sue didn't even try and take Dylan away from Eric, which wasn't true. You misrepresented Sue as working in a psychiatric hospital, even though she was just a therapeutic art teacher. You claim that Sue's a bad mother without any...
Jesus, like a laundry list of shit this guy fucked up on, and that's intentional too.
...justification, and you've even implied that she's lying at times. You honestly would have to go out of your way to make a video that tendentious. You must have put in a lot of effort to fill a video with that many lies, Timmy. For what it's worth, I believe the same thing as Randy and Judy Brown. The blame stands squarely at the door of the police and the school, who had...
Oh yeah, who had all the information and did nothing about it. Absolutely, 1000%. The school also, because like they were allowing whatever bullying going on. Schools don't do enough to stop bullying. So absolutely. And then the police, knowing this information, huge fuck up for them.
The reports of Eric's website.
We're paying them to handle these things. So.
And the hit list and the pipe bombs, and they chose to do nothing. Those are the ones that you should blame. And I also believe that the thing that radicalized Dylan and Eric into hating the school and ultimately shooting up the school was bullying. They were ritually bullied. They were pushed into lockers. They had ketchup thrown over their clothes. On one instance,
Really? I didn't know it was that bad.
They even had ketchup, but on tampons, and then had the tampons thrown at them.
Jesus
when
Christ.
you are bullied that much in a school, you start...
I would have shot it up too, to be honest with you. I'm not trying to be an asshole. It's fucked up. I would never do that. But like, honestly, I feel like, I mean, I'm not better than any of you. I could be pushed to doing things that I don't want to do too. Like, you're getting ritualistically bullied. Like, if it's that bad, yeah, dude, that's fucked up. I would have a very negative response to that. That's fucking terrible.
To hate the school. Now,
I never knew that it was that bad, that the bullying was that bad when it came to Columbine. Like, I never knew that that was such a prevalent aspect of it. That's fucking insane, man. That's fucking insane.
That doesn't provide any mitigation for what they did.
The YouTuber that I'm looking at is Miorby, M-I-O-B, MIORBY. It's going to be in the description at the bottom under sources, as always.
But those are the facts. And that's why I find it so disgusting that you did what you did. Where you made a video just filled with lies and misrepresentations and misattribution of quotes and taking quotes out of context in order to make a hate mob against Sue Klebold, who was one of the victims of Columbine. You'll probably say that you didn't make a hate mob and
The kids are bad teenagers. Yeah, that's the thing, is that like kids struggle to be empathetic. They're little human beings that aren't quite human yet. But it's the responsibility of the school to be harsh on them. Like, I've told this story. When I was a kid, I was like 16, I guess, and I was at school, and I had a period where there was a lunch table, and like, this is disgusting that I even did this. But like, I usually sat at a table and some other kids sat there. And so I walked up to them and said like, I'm going to come back and like kill you or something. I forgot what I said. Like real. And like at the time, not even aware of what I'm saying. Like, I'm just like, I obviously didn't mean it, but I'm just like, fuck you. I'm going to scare these kids. That's funny to me. It's not funny anymore. And I remember the guidance counselor talking to me and they were like, you didn't mean it, right? I was like, yeah, I didn't. And I didn't mean it, but I should have been fucking suspended or honestly, maybe even expelled for that. Like, what are you kidding me? I threatened these kids. Like, what the fuck? That's the school's fault. What if I wasn't kidding? You don't know. You don't have access to the inner machinations of my mind. Like, what the fuck? Like, you know what I mean? Like, the guidance counselors in schools are worthless. You know, you're supposed to do more. I wish I never said that, but it's like, dude, I should have gotten like suspended or something, or punched in the face. I don't know. You know what's fucked up? I feel bad for those people. I mean, they're kids then. They were all the same age though. Like, what a piece of shit I was. I hope they're doing better than me. You know, it's fucking terrible.
yeah, if you look in the comments under your video, the top comments, you'll see this. Imagine your child is repeatedly caught breaking laws and the maddest you ever get at him is when he forgets Mother's Day. Narcissism to the extreme. You can tell how uninvolved and shitty a parent that Sue is just by the fact she doesn't take or even feel a little responsibility for what happened. How dare Ted give her a platform? How hurtful this woman is to the victims in this tragedy. The fact that she's written articles, given interviews, and gave this TED Talk seeking the spotlight tells us everything we need to know about why Dylan went unchecked. She is indeed a horrible parent, and her vile words
that happened in the 80s. So, bro, I'm fucking 33, dude. I'm not from the 80s. I was born in 1990. What the fuck? Don't say that.
Have no value.
It's 2006, dude. Shut up.
Ironic that by speaking out like this in an effort to lessen her blame, she's made it clear that she deserves even more blame. This woman is culpable for what happens and she knows it. That's why her biggest fear is being confronted by people who hold her accountable. Timmy, this is the effect that you've had on people. This is what people have taken away from your video. Some people have even taken away the idea that she was doing it for money. This woman is literally cashing in on her son's status as a mass murderer. That's all I need to know. The fact that not only did she refuse to take any responsibility for what happened, but also made a profit off of it is conclusive proof that she was a dreadful mother who helped to raise a psychopath. She belongs under the prison. I think it would have been useful if Timmy had pointed out that all of the proceeds from Sue's book went directly to mental health and suicide charities. It's also worth pointing out the fact that Ted doesn't pay people for their TED Talk, so I don't know where people got this idea that she's made profit off of it.
Oh, it gives her like social profit. But I think that's the narrative they're running. But like, but either way, like whatever, you know.
Honestly, she fits the bill of someone who would raise a school shooter, having no guilty conscience over the massacre, and seemingly only upset by the fact that people might think she should feel guilty. You opened my eyes about Sue Klebold. I had read her book, watched her TED Talk.
You read the book? There's no way you read the book and watched the TED Talk. I'm like kicking myself in the ass for not reading well, I don't read. I'm not fucking gay, but for not watching the TED Talk myself, because some of these narratives would have been deconstructed. If you read the book and watched the TED Talk and you came to that conclusion based on what we've shown here in this video, or though maybe he's lying too, I don't know, but then you're a fucking idiot, no?
I did feel sorry for her and believed her. You have created this hate mob. I hope that you can sleep at night knowing that you made a video filled with lies, a hit piece, against a vulnerable victim of Columbine. If you had 1 ounce of credibility about you, Timmy, you would take down the video. You would launch an apology.
His name is Timmy. That's also like another L, you know? That's another fucking L, man. Your name is Timothy? Damn, that's terrible.
And you would tell everyone exactly what you did and why you did it. You should ask for an apology from your audience, and you should ask for an apology absolutely from Sue Klebold. And if they don't accept your apology, well, I guess you're gonna have to delete your channel. And with that, that's the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back soon. Subscribe, like the video. I'll be back. Bye.
Barry Pogger, I kind of like that video. It's pretty good.